Thanks, Justin. I just want to acknowledge that we're meeting on Gadigal land, pay my respect to elders past and present and Aboriginal people coming from their country. Now, usually when I've got a microphone in my hand, it's karaoke and it's not pretty. But, you know, we'll see what happens later tonight. I have been known to steal microphones from people singing, but I will try and restrain myself. Now, regulation can be pretty dry and registration can be pretty dry. But I just want to recount a conversation that I heard with other government partners about a year ago when we were all in a meeting and we were talking about, you know, the future of community housing and what management transfers would look like from a fax perspective and from an AHO perspective. And we were talking about a particular region and, you know, we were talking about the value that Aboriginal community housing providers bring, and somebody said, well, we can't have Aboriginal community housing providers managing mainstream tenancies, and everyone snapped and went, why not? Why not? We have Aboriginal tenants who are being managed by mainstream organisations, so when we're thinking a long-term view, where that's what the future looks like. We know that when we think about where future directions, which is the social housing policy for New South Wales, is going, we know that it's not a particularly culturally competent strategy. And we know that in order to access the opportunity that comes from future directions, we have to make sure that the sector is there. And a part of getting there is about a new registration policy. But remembering that that's a long-term vision, that when we're talking about strategy, we're talking about 10 years. But we need to begin to take that journey. Does this work? Does the clicker work? Please hold. Any favourites out there? Any Charlie Pride fans in the audience today? Dallas, do you want to come and join me? Okay, we're not at 6 schooners. So in 2012, we introduced the Build and Grow policy, which was the start of the PARS process. And our new policy is going to replace that. We know that registration is a requirement under the New South Wales Aboriginal Housing Act. And at the time we introduced Build and Grow, we had a range of pathways to registration, and that was to open up the sector and invite those who wanted to come in under Build and Grow, which was primarily funded through the Commonwealth Government under NAPARI. New registration is based around the National Regulatory System, and providers will need to apply or register for the local scheme by December 2020 to stay registered. Remembering that we're just talking about releasing this policy, so there are still conversations to be had around that. When we think about the future, we think about opportunity and making sure that ACHPs are there, playing a huge role in how social housing is provided to Aboriginal people, and the contribution that they make is recognised by government. What it does, a new registration policy, is start to consolidate and bring together some of the settings that were released under the registration policy with Build and Grow. And what we'll be looking to see is a consistent standard of tenancy and property management, and improved performance. So we know that improved performance is going to be linked to growth and being able to access a range of funding. Just on that, if you registered under NRS, then I think, as Darren pointed out when he was talking about the experience of Victoria, we know that it means ACHPs are ready and there and able to compete with not just funding that would come through the AHO, which has usually been the case unless you're quite a diverse business and you're accessing many different funding streams and housing is maybe not your core business. but it means in the future that the sector plays a huge contributory role to increase social and affordable housing in New South Wales. So what we think it might look like is that to remain registered with the AHO, providers will need to still be an eligible organisation under the Aboriginal Housing Act, and I think the gentleman from Dorrigo pointed out that that has to be a majority Aboriginal controlled and or owned organisation, and that you need to apply for registration. Applying is different to actually registering, and I think Neil will also go through that in his presentation. And new providers to register with the AHO, so new players who are coming into the market, because we are seeing other Aboriginal organisations who are wanting to bring housing into their portfolio and perhaps build upon what was a smaller business stream, and they're looking to grow commercially around housing. And that can also be in relation to developing their land. So new providers will also still need to be an eligible organisation. It's still Aboriginal controlled, either directly or indirectly, to be a land council or to be registered with ORIC. And they will have to be registered under NRS or the New South Wales local scheme. The New South Wales local scheme, which I'll just quickly briefly touch on, for land councils, there's an element in their constitution that means that if they're asked to wind up or go into administration, their constitution says those assets cannot be taken out of the control of that land council. So in order to comply with NRS, and it is a bit confusing, and as we go forward there'll be more communications coming from the registrar and from facts on that. So we needed to ask for a change to national law to say that when land councils are registered, they don't actually have to comply with that wind-up provision of the Act. And so that's what we call the local scheme. It's no different to the NRS process, except for the fact that the wind-up clause is not applied to that registration. What do organisations need to do now in order to get ready for a new policy? The AHO has been working with the New South Wales Federation of Housing to roll out NRS information sessions, and the Registrar's Office has been a key part of that over the last 3 to 4 months, and we'll continue to roll out those sessions into the near future. They're a chance for organisations to ask some questions and get more information in order to make an informed choice about whether this pathway is going to be for them. Discussing with boards, what does the future look like? We're all being asked to take a long-term view, and that's the sector as well. What are the sector's aspirations, individual organisations' aspirations in terms of housing? There's a self-assessment tool for organisations provided by the New South Wales Federation that can be used for organisations to start looking at where the gaps might be if they're thinking about applying for registration. Have a look at what your PARS assessment says. Some organisations are still going through PARS, and that's due to the length of time in between assessments, and as Neil talked about, we're trying to have a look at what is the best way to end one scheme and begin another, to make sure that organisations are best placed and that assets are protected and that we know that organisations are travelling well. And capacity building, we've talked about capacity, capability, but what it means is investment. That investment has to be accompanied with any change, so that organisations can access the resources that they need, but that needs to be developed together. And so over the next year we'd also be asking to consult with you, and today is also an opportunity for you to tell us what you need to get there. Preparation, there can never be too much. Don't they say measure twice, cut once? I've made many mistakes not using that analogy. But also thinking about what the future looks like and doing the self-assessment and attending NRS sessions is going to put you in the best position when we do launch a new registration policy. And also contact the Office of the Registrar to schedule an assessment once you are ready. And there are resources that you can access now. The Federation have good practice tools and resources for organisations to have those discussions where they might have questions that may fall outside an NRS session, information session, so make use of those. This is what we think a timeline might look like. The registration policy for December 2017. the New South Wales local scheme to follow closely at the beginning of next year to be open. PAR's function will end in June 2018, so the last rounds of assessments are happening now and will continue into early next year. And in order for everybody to be scheduled, because Neil also needs the resourcing to be able to carry out the functions associated with registration of organisations, and we know that capacity building is a part of having conversations while organisations prepare, we would be looking at performance under an interim contract and compliance capacity, and that is something that we will continue to talk to the sector about. And as you can see down the bottom, providers to decide their registration intentions, self-assess, address gaps, access capacity building as it becomes available, and there is an agenda that we're developing now, and that we ask you to apply for registration by 2020. That gives you a very brief overview. It's the beginning of the conversation. We invite your feedback and questions that you have around registration. We have workshopped the registration policy last year with providers to talk about what that could look like. But I'll hand over to Neil now to talk about registration and regulation, and happy to take questions at the end.